This land is property of the Territorial Cattle Company. You are trespassing.
The freight wagon overturned hard enough to throw broken crates across the muddy road, and a thin woman in a torn bank clerk's coat crawled from beneath the canvas before the armed riders could reach her. Caleb Morgan grabbed the reins with one hand and reached for the rifle beside his seat with the other. He had expected thieves, not a frightened woman clutching a leather ledger case against her chest like it was the only thing keeping her alive. Her name was Nora Whitfield, and she was not running because she had stolen money. She was running because she had found proof that hundreds of workers had been paid with worthless company scrip while their real gold deposits were quietly moved somewhere no honest account could explain. The woman could barely stand. Her hands shook from exhaustion, but she would not release the papers. Behind them, 3 riders appeared at the top of the road. They were not chasing a runaway clerk. They were chasing the records that could bring down a powerful cattle company. Caleb had spent years avoiding banks, officials, and anyone who claimed a piece of paper mattered more than a man's labor. A dishonest lender had taken his family's farm with stamped documents and polite words, and he had never forgotten the sound of that courthouse door closing behind him. But when Nora looked at him and whispered, "If they get those ledgers, every man who trusted that bank loses everything," Caleb saw something he had not expected. He saw the same kind of fear he had once carried. The fear of watching honest work disappear because powerful people decided the rules belonged only to them. Nora reached into the ledger case and pulled out a stack of numbered certificates. "They made it look official," she said. "They made everyone believe their deposits were safe." Then she looked toward the approaching riders. "They're coming for the evidence first." That was when Caleb understood the danger. The company did not need to prove Nora was wrong. They only needed to make sure she never reached the Territorial Bank when it opened at sunrise. And what Nora carried beneath those freight tarps was not just a collection of numbers. It was the name of every person the company had betrayed. For those who believe one honest person can still stand against a powerful lie, stay with this story, because the road ahead would test whether a man who had lost faith in justice could find the courage to defend it again. Caleb pulled the wagon upright, helped Nora climb inside, and covered the broken crates with fresh canvas. Then he made a choice that would tie his name to hers before he even knew the full truth. When the riders reached the road behind him, they would not find a frightened clerk traveling alone. They would find a husband protecting his wife. The abandoned freight shed stood 2 miles outside town, far enough from the main road that passing riders would not notice the weak glow of the lantern inside. Mara Morgan pulled the wagon door shut and listened. She was a thin woman who had learned long ago that survival came from paying attention before speaking. She checked the window, checked the rifle near the wall, and checked the woman sitting at the table with both hands wrapped around a tin cup of water. Nora Whitfield had not asked for comfort. She had asked for a place where the truth could survive until morning. Mara understood that kind of request. She had spent years rebuilding a small freight business after a lender took her family property with documents that looked perfectly legal. The papers had carried signatures, seals, and official language. They had also carried a lie. That was why she did not trust a stack of papers simply because powerful men stamped them. Nora noticed the way Mara kept looking at the ledger case. "You think I stole them," Nora said. Mara shook her head. "I think men with money don't chase empty boxes." Nora lowered her eyes. Inside the case were duplicate bank ledgers, payment records, and numbered certificates showing that a cattle company had issued company scrip to workers while transferring their actual deposits away from the accounts they were promised were protected. The company had built a system that looked ordinary from a distance. Workers received paper. The company kept the gold. And anyone who questioned the arrangement was told the same thing: that the records were complicated, that the workers did not understand banking, that nobody would believe them. Mara had heard those words before. Not from a cattle company, from a lender who took her home. Nora slowly opened the ledger case. "These are copies from the bank records," she said. "The originals still exist, but not for long. Mara looked at her. How do you know? Because I saw the manager send for them. Nora's voice became quieter. He knows I found the second set of books. The room went still. Outside, a horse moved somewhere beyond the shed. Both women turned toward the sound. Mara reached for the rifle. Nora froze. That's what they do, Nora whispered. They make people afraid before they ever have to prove they're right. Mara watched her carefully. The woman was exhausted. Her coat was torn. Her hands were scratched from crawling beneath the wagon when the riders began searching the road. But she was not afraid of the work ahead. She was afraid that nobody would listen. Mara understood that fear better than she wanted to admit. She poured more water into Nora's cup. Eat something. Nora looked surprised. I thought you didn't trust me. I don't trust the company chasing you. That was the closest thing to kindness Mara had offered in a long time. Before sunrise, they would need to reach the territorial bank. But the road into town was controlled by company guards who knew every wagon traveling through the valley. An unmarried woman carrying financial records would be stopped before she reached the doors. Nora had already learned that. They will search anyone alone, she said. Mara understood what she was asking before Nora said the words. The same lie that might protect Nora could destroy Mara's reputation. A woman traveling with a stranger was suspicious. A husband and wife traveling together were often ignored. Mara looked away. She had rebuilt her life by refusing to depend on anyone. Trust had cost her once. Maybe it would cost her again. You want me to say we're married? Nora nodded. Only until the bank opens. Mara almost laughed. Almost. A false marriage was a dangerous thing in a place where everyone knew everyone else's business. But so was letting a group of wealthy men erase hundreds of workers with a pen. Mara picked up the ledger case. One day, she said, you're going to explain why you were willing to risk your life for a book full of numbers. Nora looked at the papers. Because every number belongs to someone. That answer stayed with Mara. Not because it was impressive. Because it was simple. The same way a stolen farm was not just land. The same way a missing payment was not just ink. The next hour passed quickly. Mara repaired the wagon wheel, packed the ledgers beneath a false layer of supplies, and gave Nora her spare coat. When Nora tried to refuse, Mara shook her head. You want people to believe you're my wife? Nora looked confused. What does that have to do with the coat? People notice when a husband lets his wife freeze. For the first time that night, Nora almost smiled. Then the smile disappeared. A shadow crossed the window. Someone had found the shed. Mara lifted the rifle. The lantern flame moved as a voice called from outside. Open up. We're looking for a bank employee. Nora stopped breathing. The men had arrived sooner than expected. And now Mara had only seconds to decide whether the lie that could save Nora would also place a target on her own back. Mara opened the shed door before the men outside could break it down. She stood in the doorway with the rifle lowered but visible, her expression calm enough to make the men wonder whether they had walked into a trap instead of a hiding place. 3 riders waited outside. The man in front wore a clean coat, polished boots, and the kind of confidence that came from knowing most people stepped aside before he asked. His name was Silas Vane. He worked for the cattle company that controlled the valley's biggest herds, the local store contracts, and nearly every man's paycheck. He looked past Mara. We're searching for a bank clerk who stole company records. Mara did not move. Funny thing about searching, she said, most honest men don't arrive before sunrise with armed friends. Silas smiled politely. That smile bothered Mara more than a threat would have. Men like him never believed they were doing wrong. They believed paperwork could make anything acceptable. Ma'am, I don't want trouble. Mara glanced behind her. Nora stood near the table wearing Mara's spare coat, her hair covered, her face lowered. Silas could not see the ledger case hidden beneath the supply blankets. But he saw enough. You traveling with someone? Mara answered without hesitation. My wife. The word left the doorway heavier than she expected. Silas studied her. Not because he believed it, because he understood exactly what it meant. A married woman under a man's protection was harder to isolate. A lone bank clerk could be accused. A wife had someone standing beside her. Silas removed his hat. Didn't know you were married, Mara. Mara felt a cold feeling move through her. She had never told this man her name. Small Valley, Silas said. People know things. That was the first moment she understood the size of the enemy. He was not just chasing Nora. He already knew who could be used against her. Mara kept her hand near the rifle. You've found nobody here. Silas looked toward the shed, then toward the wagon, then back at Mara. Careful who you protect. Mara's voice stayed quiet. Careful who you threaten. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Silas smiled again. Morning comes soon. When the bank opens, everyone gets to see what kind of woman your wife really is. He turned his horse. The riders left without searching. That frightened Mara more than if they had forced their way inside. Because Silas Vane had not needed to win that moment. He only needed to remind them that he had time. After the riders disappeared, Nora finally spoke. You should have let them take me. Mara closed the door. No, you don't even know me. I know enough. Nora stared at her. Mara placed the rifle back against the wall. I know someone with nothing to gain stood between a powerful company and a group of workers who had nobody else. Nora looked down. My father lost everything because he trusted the wrong people. Mara paused. It was the first personal thing Nora had said. My father kept saying the bank records were wrong. He told people their accounts had been changed. She swallowed. Nobody believed him. Mara understood. Because nobody had believed her either. The difference was that Nora had found proof. And proof was dangerous. By morning, they entered town with the wagon covered and the lie intact. Mara sat beside Nora on the front bench. Anyone watching would see two women traveling as a married couple. But inside the wagon, beneath flour sacks and spare blankets, were documents that could expose the richest company in the territory. The Territorial Bank was supposed to open at 8. They arrived at 7:30. The town was already awake. But something was wrong. The bank doors were closed. A crowd stood outside. Mara climbed down. What happened? Nobody answered at first. Then an older clerk stepped forward. The manager says the opening is delayed. Nora looked toward the building. She knew. A delay was exactly what someone needed. Where are the records? She whispered. Mara followed her eyes. Inside that building were the original accounts. The proof that could confirm the copies. Without them, the company could call the ledgers fake. Then the crowd separated. Silas Vane walked through carrying a folder. He did not look surprised to see them. He looked prepared. I was hoping you would come here, he said. Mara stepped in front of Nora. Silas opened the folder. Inside were company notices accusing Nora Whitfield of stealing confidential banking materials. The town grew quiet. He had moved first. And for the first time, Mara saw how the company had won for so long. They did not destroy the truth. They buried it under official-looking lies. Silas turned toward the crowd. This woman stole records and is trying to damage honest businesses. Then he looked at Mara. And you are helping her. Mara felt every eye in town turn toward her. The same feeling she had felt years ago when the courthouse took her farm. Standing alone. Knowing the truth. Watching everyone else decide whether they believed you. Nora whispered, I'm sorry. Mara did not look back. Don't be. Silas smiled. You really want to lose everything again for someone you barely know? That question struck deeper than he realized, because that was exactly what Mara feared. But then she looked at the workers gathered outside the bank. Men holding company scrip that would never buy what they had earned. People who had trusted a promise written on paper. Mara stepped forward. Open the bank. Silas laughed softly. You think a wagon driver can demand that? Mara looked at the locked doors. No. She reached for the ledger case. But I think the people who earned that money can. For the first time, the crowd stopped looking away. One worker stepped forward. Then another. Silas's expression changed. Because his greatest advantage had never been the money. It had been silence. And silence was beginning to disappear. But before the bank doors could open, a shout came from inside. Someone had found the records room, and smoke was already coming through the windows. The first window of the Territorial Bank shattered before anyone reached the door. Smoke rolled into the street, and the crowd that had gathered around Silas Vane turned toward the building where the original records were stored. For one moment, nobody moved. That was all the company had ever depended on. A moment of hesitation. A moment where people decided speaking was too dangerous. Then Mara Morgan ran inside. Mara, Nora shouted. But Mara was already through the doorway. The smoke burned her throat as she pushed toward the records room. The fire was not large yet, but it had been placed carefully. A small flame near the shelves. A broken lantern on the floor. Enough damage to destroy papers without bringing down the entire building. Someone had not come to burn the bank. Someone had come to burn the truth. Mara pulled her coat over her face and searched through the smoke. The ledgers were exactly where Nora said they would be. Behind the lower cabinet. Locked. She grabbed the key hanging near the manager's desk. The lock turned. Inside were the original account books. But there was another problem. The room was already filling with smoke, and the door behind her had slammed shut. For a few seconds, Mara felt the old fear return. The same helpless feeling from years before. Standing in front of a system designed by people who already decided the outcome. Then she heard something. A cough. Not hers. Someone else was inside. The bank manager was trapped near the back office. Mara could have taken the records and left. Nobody would have blamed her. The papers were the reason they had risked everything. But she dropped the ledger case and moved toward the sound. She pulled the older man away from the smoke, dragged him toward the window, and helped him outside before returning for the books. By the time she came back into the street, her coat was burned at the sleeve and the ledger pages were stained with smoke. Silas Vane stood watching. His expression was not anger. It was surprise, because he had expected greed. He had expected someone who cared only about saving themselves. He had not expected mercy. Nora rushed to Mara. Are you hurt? Mara shook her head. The books are. They opened the ledgers on the courthouse steps while the town gathered around. Some pages were damaged. Some ink had blurred. Silas immediately stepped forward. There it is. He pointed at the ruined pages. The evidence is destroyed. Nora looked at the records. For the first time, fear returned to her face. Because he was right about one thing. The original books were no longer perfect. The company had created enough damage to make the truth easier to question. Silas turned toward the crowd. These women brought stolen records, caused panic, and now they have ruined a bank. The crowd grew uncertain again. Mara looked at Nora. Can you still prove it? Nora opened the damaged ledger carefully. She turned several pages, then stopped. A small line of numbers remained visible. Not enough for someone who did not understand banking. Enough for someone who did. They thought the copies were the danger, Nora said. She touched the page. But the numbers were repeated. Mara looked confused. Nora explained quickly. Every deposit had a matching certificate number. The company could change a page, but they could not change every worker's receipt. That was when they understood. The truth was not held in one book. It was held in hundreds of people who still carried proof in their pockets. The next hours changed the town. Workers came forward with certificates, old receipts, payment records. Every piece matched the numbers Nora had copied. The company had hidden the gold, but they could not erase every person who had been cheated. By afternoon, the case reached the county courthouse. Silas arrived smiling. He still believed he could win, because official papers were still on his side. The judge looked over the accusations. The defendant claims the bank clerk stole confidential records. Silas stood. Yes, Your Honor. He placed the company notices on the table. They are official. Nora sat quietly. Mara watched the judge read the papers. She recognized that look. The same look from the courthouse years earlier. A person deciding whether a document mattered more than a human being. Then the judge asked, Miss Whitfield, do you deny taking these records? Nora stood. I took copies. A murmur moved through the room. Silas smiled. There, she admits it. Nora continued. I copied them because the originals were being altered. Silas shook his head. An accusation without proof. Then he looked toward the damaged bank ledgers, especially when the proof has been destroyed. For a moment, it seemed like he had won. The judge looked toward the burned pages. The workers looked down. Even Nora seemed unsure. Then the bank manager stood. Slowly, quietly. Silas turned. You don't need to do this. The man's face tightened. Everyone saw the fear. His hands shook. Because Silas Vane had power over him too. The room waited. The manager looked at the company representative, then at the workers sitting behind him. Finally, he looked at Mara, a woman who had gone into a burning building for a man she did not know. I saw the transfers, he said. Silas's expression changed. The manager swallowed. I saw the gold move from the worker accounts into company-controlled accounts. The courtroom went silent. Silas stepped forward. Be careful. The warning was quiet, almost polite. The manager nearly stopped. Then Nora placed one damaged certificate on the table. The number. The manager looked down. She pointed. Say what this number matches. His voice returned. The private transfer record. The judge leaned forward. The clerk brought out the damaged ledger. The certificate number matched. Then another worker came forward. Then another. The company's paperwork had been designed to look complete, but it was built on a lie. And lies become difficult to maintain when ordinary people start bringing their own evidence. Silas Vane looked around the courtroom. For the first time, he was not surrounded by fear. He was surrounded by witnesses. The judge reviewed the documents for nearly an hour. Then he delivered the decision. The company's scrip accounts were frozen. The workers' deposits were recognized as legitimate. The accusations against Nora Whitfield were dismissed, and the evidence of deliberate financial fraud was sent forward for prosecution. Silas did not lose because Mara had a stronger weapon. He lost because too many people finally refused to stay silent. Outside the courthouse, Nora stood beside Mara. It was never just about the money, was it? Mara looked toward the workers holding their recovered records. No. She paused. It was about whether people believed they mattered. For the first time in years, Mara felt the weight she had carried begin to loosen. But when the crowd went home and the road became quiet, one fear remained. She still wondered if trusting someone again would only give the world another chance to take something away. The freight wagon sat outside the restored bank 6 months later, its canvas repaired, its wheels replaced, and its driver no longer traveling alone. Mara Morgan still checked the road every morning. She still listened when horses approached. She still kept a rifle near the door. Justice had returned the workers' money and exposed the men who had built their fortune on stolen trust. But winning a fight did not erase every fear left behind. Some wounds stayed quiet. Some fears learned to hide. Nora Whitfield noticed it before Mara admitted it. You still expect someone to come take it away. Mara looked up from the ledger she was organizing. Take what? Nora smiled slightly. The peace. Mara did not answer. Because Nora was right. For years, Mara had believed anything good could disappear the moment she stopped guarding it. Her farm. Her family name. Her trust in people. But the months after the trial had shown her something different. Not every person who knocked on a door came to take something. Some came because they needed help. The old freight shed where Nora had hidden became a small office where workers could check their accounts before signing contracts. No one handed over papers without understanding them anymore. Nora taught them how to read the numbers, how to ask questions, how to recognize when a promise on paper did not match the truth behind it. Mara continued hauling freight across the valley, but she carried something different now. Not just supplies, not just goods. She carried the knowledge that ordinary people could protect one another when they stopped standing apart. Still, one evening, a sudden crash from the shed made Mara reach for her rifle before she even thought. She moved through the doorway quickly. Nora stood beside a fallen stack of old account books. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Then Nora laughed softly. It was only a shelf. Mara lowered the rifle. She looked embarrassed. I know. But Nora understood. Fear did not disappear because someone won a courtroom case. It disappeared because someone stayed long enough to prove the danger was gone. She picked up the fallen books. Mara helped her. Neither woman mentioned the past. They did not need to. Some things were healed by words. Others were healed by ordinary moments repeated until the heart finally believed them. Years later, people in the valley still told the story of the bank clerk who carried the truth under a freight tarp and the woman who called herself her wife long enough to save her life. But the part they remembered most was not the trial. It was what happened afterward. A town that once stayed silent learned to ask questions. Workers who once accepted whatever they were given learned the value of their own labor. And a woman who once believed she had lost everything discovered that trust could return slowly, one honest person at a time. Mara never forgot the night Nora climbed out from beneath those freight tarps. She remembered the fear, the danger, the choice. But most of all, she remembered the simple truth that changed everything. A person does not rebuild a life by holding on to what was lost. They rebuild it by choosing what they are willing to protect. And that was the legacy left behind by two women who stood against a lie bigger than themselves. They proved that a ledger could reveal corruption. But courage was what brought the truth into the light. If this story reminded you that one person choosing to stand beside another can change an entire community, write truth stands in the comments and tell us where you are watching from. There are still stories from the old frontier where mercy, courage, and honesty mattered more than power.